Here's your host, Dennis Rimmer.
Thanks again for joining us. It's the Talking Books and Stuffs podcast. Today's edition or version features Eve Lazarus, who is the writer with an Aussie accent and a Vancouver address. So, Miss Oxy, can you tell us, Eve, hello, how are you?
I'm fine. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. An Aussie accent and a Vancouver address. So let's go back to the beginning. How did that all come about?
What, coming to Vancouver or books or which part?
We'll start with your origin story. So you must have grown up in Australia.
I did, yeah. I came over to Canada in the mid-'80s and met my husband now and ended up staying. My 2 weeks turned into 40-odd years. So here I am.
Here you are.
Still with my accent, as you can tell.
Yeah. So were you a journalist or reporter in Australia before you came here? Here as in Canada?
No. I wasn't. I worked for the ABC, the kind of equivalent to the CBC in production, and for a while at various departments, TV Times, doing programs and stuff like that. So I was on the fringes of journalism, but I didn't actually start reporting until I got to Vancouver. I went back to school, did journalism certificate, and went to work for the Vancouver Sun for a couple of years.
I thought so, because I've lived all over, so I used to deliver the Vancouver Sun way back in elementary school, and
Wow.
grew up in Crescent Beach in White Rock, down south there. Just
Very nice.
It's a great place. Too bad I'm not there now. But, so how did you get from that into Eve Lazarus is a crime reporter, we'll say. How did that come about?
Well, I really fell into it because I wasn't a crime reporter. I was a business reporter primarily. And, once I left the Sun, I had 3 children. I couldn't cope with the shift work, and I went freelance. And I worked for, a number of sort of investment magazines and grocery magazines and things that sound pretty dry, but, made a decent living out of it. And I was also, and we could back then, but I was also doing some lifestyle stuff as well. And, as a freelancer, you do whatever you can to pay the bills. And I came across this story. I was reading the Vancouver Sun actually one morning, and there was a story in the real estate section that talked about this guy, James Johnson. And it talked about how he was a history detective, a home researcher, and he would be hired by people usually that had heritage houses in Vancouver to research the history and tell, everything that happened, social history, who lived in the house, what happened in the house. And I thought, oh my God, that's so interesting. So I phoned him up and I said, I'd love to write about you. And he took me on a tour of Strathcona. Do you know Strathcona? It's just outside the really downtown east side. And, it's a beautiful area of heritage homes. And first time I'd been there and went on a tour, and he'd be pointing out these houses like, that was a bootlegger's house and this corrupt cop lived there. And there was a madam in that house. Katie Lang lived over here in the 70s. And it just went on. And I thought, oh my God, this is so fascinating. It's a story that a house has a history, like a person, and, telling the story really of Vancouver's history through that house. And I really loved the corrupt angle, because I was never really into history, with the, tourism and forestry and fisheries and all that never really did much for me. But suddenly I, thought, wow, Vancouver's so much more interesting than I thought. It's got this really sort of scuzzy underbelly. And I started looking into some of the stories that happened in the house, and a lot of them were murders, which I guess isn't that surprising. So I'd written a couple of books about, really based on this idea that a house has history, genealogy. And then I wrote another book called Cold Case Vancouver that kind of expanded on those stories in the house. Right. And I thought, I've kind of left history, and now I'm writing true crime or historical true crime. And so Cold Case Vancouver came out, and I'd worked really closely with the families and with law enforcement on that, but it just felt really weird to say, okay, book's out, thanks, moving on now. So I started a Facebook page with the same name, and where families could, sort of come and talk, and where I could put up a post on the anniversary of the time that the person went missing or when they were murdered, and it was a way to remember them and keep the story alive and maybe get some tips, in a best case scenario, get someone with more information. And that really hasn't happened, but, you always live in hope. But it really does work as a memorial, and people would write to me and say, could you put up a post about, my missing daughter or my missing mother or my, unsolved murder of, my cousin or whatever, and I'd say sure, and it just really expanded. And that really morphed into Cold Case BC that came out in 2022. So that's really the story. One book's really sort of led into another, and now I've, my other one's completely off true crime, except it does start with a murder, but it's called Beneath Dark Waters, the legacy of the Empress of Ireland shipwreck, and
Right.
it's about the CPR liner that sank in 1914 off the coast of Rimouski in Quebec, and I was just sort of stunned that it had such a huge Western Canadian connection to it. Like, some of the most passengers out of BC came from Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, which just blew me away. And next to Toronto, the most passengers were booked out of Vancouver. And I'd never heard of this story. Had you? Did you know about the Empress of Ireland?
I did, because I have a short chapter in my book called The Great Canadian Notebook, but it's like 1.5 pages, so it's not a whole book. But I knew about it being sunk and the loss of lives and all that when it hit a Norwegian freighter. So
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I was amazed, and even now when I'm doing talks, I'll say, who's heard of the Empress of Ireland? And most people haven't, and it's
Oh, no.
kind of astounding because any 12-year-old kid will tell you about the Titanic. But, I mean, few would know about the Empress of Ireland, and it's such a huge Canadian story.
And it's amazing, like you said about that. Kids will tell you about dinosaurs, but they won't tell you or can't tell you who the first prime minister was, or when the flag came out, or anything like that. So
Right.
it's crazy. So the first book was Cold Case Vancouver. Was that the first
No,
book?
the first book was At Home with History, and it was really based on James' tour, and it kind of expanded out of that. And then I did a similar one in Victoria called Sensational Victoria.
Right.
Same idea, that the house had story, and that was very heavily on ghosts. So, weirdly enough, I'd go knock on someone's door to talk to them about a heritage garden or, a famous painter perhaps that, lived in the house, and I'd open the door, they'd open the door and say, "Oh, have you come to talk to us about our ghost?" And I'd say, oh, yes, I have.
Yes, I guess so. So,
Yeah, so it was weird. And it turns out Victoria's, the most haunted city in BC, if not Canada. And people are really proud. In Vancouver, we hide our ghosts. We don't want it to bring down resale value. But Victoria, very, very proud of their ghosts.
I lived in Victoria too for a while. So which is the most haunted house in Victoria?
Oh, it'd be hard to say. There's so many. I think Emily Carr in James Bay. Pretty much every house that she was associated with, apparently, she still haunts, among others. So the Emily Carr house, I would think, would be a runner. But there are many that would be up for that.
Emily Carr, yes, very famous painter and everything else you can think of. So I just love her paintings, the way they capture, to me, what the light is in BC and the coast area. It's just brilliant. So that got you rolling. Tell us about your publisher. How did that connection come about?
With the first book?
With yes, or any of them. Most of them are from Arsenal, right?
And yeah, I started with Anvil Press, and it's funny. I teach a class at SFU for continuing education, and it's how to get your non-fiction book published. And I always start with this because my first book, I had a pretty good track record. I had a lot of clippings, to do with this whole social history idea, which my book was about. I'd had, track record as a reporter and, freelance writer. So, it's a decent resume to go out with. And I had 28 rejections from publishers across the country. Before I found Anvil. I guess picked it up off their slush pile one day and said, maybe we'll do something with this. And thank God they did. And they produced that book and two after that. And with cold cases, with the true crime, I switched to Arsenal Pulp Press. And I've been with them ever since. And we've done now 6 books together.
I was thinking of Arsenal, and I wasn't thinking of the first one, which was Anvil.
That's right. Yeah, they're also a fairly small Vancouver publisher. They've got a really interesting list.
They've been around for a long time, both of those.
Yep. Yeah, at least quarter of a century, probably more, I think.
School longer, I'm sure. So that was the first one. So what is your day-to-day routine then? How do you go about collecting all these stories? You said you teach a class, you get up very early. So tell us about your daily routine.
It really depends what I'm doing. If I'm working on a book, it depends what phase I'm in. My favourite thing out of everything is research. And I research everything to death. I love that. With the book about the Empress, Beneath Dark Waters, I actually I was very lucky. I got a Canadian Council grant for that. And that was fabulous. It's like winning the lottery. Right?
Oh, right.
An author to get that. But I did 3 trips across the country doing research on that. At one stage we actually took a Zodiac out to the wreck site in the middle of the St. Lawrence River, and that was pretty amazing. That was really the time I knew I was going to do a book. You're hovering over this wreck, and even though it's 110 years old, there's still bodies in there. It's like 800 people roughly never got out of the ship, and that was really impactful. Just thinking that, oh my God, this is I'm hovering over this underwater graveyard, and so, we did that. There was a lot of, I'd go to individual archives because a lot of this book wasn't so much the shipwreck, it was the survivors, the Canadian survivors. I really wanted to dig into that, show what a story that was, what a huge Canadian story. And to do that, I had to track their descendants and, try to get their, personal letters, diaries, newspaper reports that came later, to little community papers and things like that. Because
yes.
What I found was a lot of the early newspaper reports were just wrong. And so I really had to sort of go further and dig deeper and really go into the family histories. And in one point, there was a survivor that was from Stettler, Alberta.
Yep.
And he went back there, and so I contacted the Museum and Archives there, and they said, oh, that's so interesting you'd call. We actually have a chest of his that's been sitting in the basement for, decades. And we really haven't gone through it. And I said, oh, hold it right there. I'm coming. I'll help you with that.
I'm on my way.
And pretty much. And so off to Stettler, Alberta. But that was fabulous because here's this chest. It was, again, it was so exciting for me, and you're always hoping you're finding letters and diaries, and we really didn't in this case, but we did find tapes of his voice and that he'd done with interviews and things like that, and I was able to connect with one of his descendants in Switzerland who also had more information. So it was just kind of building on that, and it was a lot of fun, a lot of work, took a lot of years, but it was a lot of fun. And a lot of that, with that shipwreck, there were 161 people from the Salvation Army aboard, and they were going to England for a congress, and almost all of them died. They were real heroes that night. They really saved lives, and in doing that, lost a lot of their own. And what I was able to find out was the Salvation Army has this amazing archives in Toronto, and they'd kept a lot of the letters. And even from Captain Kendall, they had some of his letters. And that was, again, like a gold mine of information. So I've been able to tell a lot of the survivor stories in their own words. And nothing's made up. Everything, it's coming from their letters or the inquiry or newspaper reports that sometimes they wrote them. So, and again, from the families. In one case, one of the survivors from Nelson, BC, was Irish. And he went home and ended up staying home. And his granddaughter became a nun. But she grew up with him. She lived with him until she was 18. And so she could tell me first-hand accounts, which was just incredible.
It's amazing, and this is so fun. I locked my keys in my car in Stettler, Alberta, once, and my grandparents came from England in 1910, and they first moved to Nelson, BC. So,
Oh my God! Do you know what ship they came out on?
oh gosh, nobody ever told us, and I
That'd be
didn't never thought to ask. You know,
Could have been the Empress. You know, it brought out over 190,000 people came out on the Empress, and I can't verify this statistic, but it looks like 1 in 40 Canadians have a connection back to the Empress
oh my gosh.
between 1906 and 1914, and I just find that staggering.
Do they have? Is there a list somewhere where you can find passenger lists for the Empress?
Sure is in my book.
Okay, I'll run out and get it.
I spent a lot of time doing the genealogy of them and looking, you know, there are 139 kids on board under 13 and 3 survived.
Oh, so how,
I did try to do a lot, try to track down the genealogy, where people were from, and a lot of it's quite subjective, you know, who is a Canadian? You know, I thought, well, you know, they're going back after a couple of years. Does that mean, you know, they were going back because they're going back forever? It didn't work out. Are they being deported? So I found out a lot of people were deported. So it was hard. So a lot of it's subjective in that case. But
so the name of the book is
Beneath Dark Waters,
Beneath Dark Water.
Yeah, the legacy of the Empress of Ireland shipwreck.
Now, how deep is the wreck?
Not very, about 45 metres
Okay.
down, but it's in really frigid cold water. 7 divers have lost their lives going down there. It's really for, you know, professional divers only. Visibility apparently is awful, and the St. Lawrence River. You know, being out there, I'm not a good ship person at all. I don't like anything that floats, and I was quite freaked out being out there in the middle of it. But, you know, you're thinking, oh my God, you know, this is August. It's the middle of the day.
Right.
What was it like for these people in the middle of the night? It was 6.5 kilometres swim to shore if they could make it, but the water was frigid at the end of May, and the ship sank. Get it, the ship sank in 14 minutes. I mean, less than the time we've been talking now.
Yeah. Holy.
And that's the time from it being hit, and people were asleep in their bunks.
Oh, yeah.
So unless they immediately got out, they drowned. And, you know, it's amazing to me when you think about that, how many survived.
And what was...
Not that many. But
No, right. What was the ship it collided with?
it was called the Storstad. It was a Norwegian coal ship coming from Sydney, Nova Scotia to Montreal. And it was fully laden with coal. And what had happened, fog had come down and blanketed both ships. And both, you know, the ship's captains had just stayed on course. They would have been fine. But they both tweaked, and it was a perfect storm. It just hit the Empress in the worst possible place to bring it down straight away. Because everything was a water, you know, 2 years after the Titanic, and it was supposed to be, you know, a watertight ship. It had 10 watertight compartments, and they didn't have time to close the doors. It just flooded within minutes.
It's always down to chance and somebody makes a mistake. So, you know, it's not... Somebody told me once there's no such thing as accidents. It's always something happened that shouldn't have happened. Mainly error in judgment or things like that. There's hardly any true accidents. I don't know if I believe that, but that's an interesting concept. So
yeah, it kind of takes fate out of your hands, doesn't it?
yeah. So a couple more stories I want to talk about from your previous books. Well, first of all, the CK&W story. The guy was a promotion manager who managed to... Rini
Castellani was a promotions guy with CK&W, which is our big station, which is still around.
Yeah, I used to work there.
Did you? Oh, did you know about the story?
Sort of, but nothing. Like, I went to BCIT right out of high school, taking broadcast communications, so I was a control room operator for a while at NW. Then I came back a couple of years later as a copywriter. But if somebody mentioned it to me, I can't remember. But something about a milkshake, how did that happen?
Well, it was 1964. 5. And Rennie was, a pretty good-looking guy. He was a bit of a celebrity. He was married to Esther. They were both 40 years old. They had an 11-year-old daughter, Janine. And Rennie fell in love with Lolly, the station's 25-year-old receptionist.
It's always the receptionist, yes.
Yes. And so he was Catholic, and he was, very into image. I mean, the guy's a psychopath. And he decided, well, he's not going to get a divorce, which he could have done, of course, but he would just murder her. And it was diabolically clever, actually, because he used arsenic in her favourite milkshakes, and he would bring her a bit, every day, and he'd look like the loving husband, and she would get sicker and sicker, and he would bring her more milkshakes, and eventually she died. And arsenic was so clever as a murder weapon because, if it had been the century before, he probably would have got caught. But, back in 65, it was in weed killer and rat killers, and really easy to obtain. And given in small doses, it mimicked, natural things like gastritis or, a virus or whatever. And they really didn't know. I mean, Esther was in hospital for 12 weeks, I think. And they did 121 different tests on her and couldn't find out what it was that was making her ill. And when she died, they did a hospital autopsy, still couldn't find out what was wrong. And if he'd just had it cremated, he would have got away with it. But he didn't. And I guess the Catholic thing popped in, although it was allowed back then. He would have got away with it. But this doctor just couldn't let go. And he finally, went over everything again. He thought arsenic could have caused those symptoms. And it had to be tested, especially with a spectrometer or something like that. And as it does now, it won't turn up unless you do a special test for it. And, he found arsenic, and she had 1,500 times the normal amount of, arsenic that we have in our bodies. And then, things went fairly quickly. They found out about Lolly. 2 days after the funeral, he'd taken Lolly, her son, and Janine down to Disneyland for a holiday. And he'd applied for a mortgage in Lolly and his names, even though Esther was still alive at that point. So he did a lot of really stupid things. Yes. He did get convicted for capital murder twice, actually, after an appeal. And literally, he was about to be hung, and 2 weeks before his date, the death penalty was commuted in Canada. So he walked, and he ended up not being in jail very long. He got day parole after a very short time and worked for Abbotsford Community Centre, played Santa Claus one year, and was working for Abbotsford radio station. He was completely paroled after 10 years after that.
Oh, really? So, yeah. Do a murder become a Santa Claus? I mean, every Canadian person's dreams. So this is Eve Lazarus we're talking with. Her latest book is Beneath Dark Waters, all about the sinking of the Empress of Ireland in the St. Lawrence River in 1914, was it?
That's right.
Yeah. And I've got a couple more questions. Oh, speaking of research, you go about the research like hands-on, right? You just knock on doors, as it were, and make phone calls, and is that how it comes about? Go lots of archives?
Oh, all of that, yeah, all of that and more. Especially with the cold cases, I usually work with law enforcement. It could be retired detectives that worked on cold cases 30 years ago. Could be prosecutor's office, could be a coroner. I like to work with the families. I like to have them on board. If we're doing that, if I can talk to RCMP, they won't talk to you about unsolved murders, but they will talk to me about missing people. So I did I just released a podcast episode last Friday about the Mission Skull. It was a skull found in Mission BC in Blue in 1995. They knew it was a woman, but they couldn't identify her, and then several years went by and they found more of her remains on Robert Picton's pig farm.
Oh, right. That guy.
Yeah. They think that she was his earliest victim, and she's the only one that they've found remains of that hasn't been identified. So I wanted to know why they hadn't done forensic genetic genealogy on her, after 30 years, to find out, if they could track her that way. And I was amazed to get an interview with one of the head honchos of the RCMP that worked on Picton's file. And he told me that they were, in fact, doing genealogy on it, and that would be happening fairly soon. So that was quite gratifying.
Right.
The episode's up now, and I was quite pleased with that. I'm hoping something will come out of that she actually will get a name back.
And are these people approachable, or are they kind of wary when you first phone up and say, "Hi, I'm Yves Lazarus. I want to write about the dead body you found"? Like,
oh, you mean the police, law enforcement?
Or anybody, yeah.
It really depends. A lot of people already follow me on social media. I've got a fairly large following, and through the podcast Cold Case Canada, it's done amazingly well. I can't even believe the numbers I'm getting. I don't really understand it, actually, because it's just me doing it. I do everything. Last year I got nominated for a Webby Award, which stunned me because I was up against these really large American, network shows, and just me.
Wow.
So that was very gratifying, and that was for an episode called The Alley Murders, and with a number of mostly Indigenous women, sex workers who had drug dependencies who were really, not investigated. It was around the time of Picton and missing women, and I worked with two retired homicide detectives and the families. Some of the families had been waiting for 35 years to get some information, and we were actually able to give that to them. So I was so proud of that, and that to me is what it's all about, is able to give some families some closure, and it doesn't get better than that.
And archives, like city archives, provincial archives, I'm imagining they're quite a great source of information. We did a podcast a few weeks back with the City of Saskatoon archivist, and one of the things he talked about was letters, family letters, and he said they're always there. The archives are forever. So that's if your family has lots of letters, something, you can always donate them to the archives, because you never know when someone might be tracking something down about that. I find that conversation very interesting. Do you use newspapers.com at all?
Oh, yes. Oh, my God.
Right, yes.
That's the best thing that ever happened to me.
Right.
My life changed when that was on. I used to say my first books I would trot down to the Special Collections of Vancouver Public Library or Vancouver Archives to go through directories and all that sort of stuff. And,
all right.
If I wanted to see if the house was still standing, I'd have to drive out and look at it. And, I'd spend days. I'm sure they thought I worked there. And now, with newspapers.com, I can get the same, and the directories and Google Maps, I can get the information on my phone in, 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Whereas it took me days and days and days. It truly was life-changing. And I wondered if it would make us, researchers, irrelevant, but it hasn't. It really hasn't. People, still rely on us to put the stories together.
Oh, yeah.
And dig deeper. Because that's really the first start. That's step one.
Right.
Start with newspapers, and then, you can find contacts through that, and find out who the detectives were that worked on the case back in 1975, if they're still alive, track them down, find the family members. In my case, doing the survivors of the Empress. Obviously none of the survivors were still alive. And the children mostly were dead. I don't think there are any children left alive. But the grandchildren were still around. And some,
that would make sense. Yep.
Yeah, but they're getting quite elderly now. But it's been interesting since the book came out in the end of April. I've done a couple of talks now, and I started to talk with who's heard of the Empress, and the last couple. When I was working on the book, I asked that, one hand might go up, and now all these hands go up. And I said, well, who's got a connection to the Empress? And all these hands go up again. And it's all these descendants now have heard about the book, and I get emails, on a weekly basis saying, my great-grandfather was on that ship. He, either died or he survived. So the story's continuing now. I'm gathering these stories, and I do a blog called Every Place Has a Story, and I'll be adding that. So, there's an ongoing, I guess, research thing for anyone that wants it, about these people, what happened, and more family stories are coming together. And I just love that, this is ongoing, this story of the Empress.
It's amazing. I want to talk a little bit about another case that I was not connected to, but sort of on the edge, the Tanya Van Cuylenborg and Jay Cook situation.
Right.
You wrote about that as well. And I was working at a radio station in Mount Vernon, Washington, when that happened, and living in Bellingham, where the murder van was found. So that story, a lot of people would still be alive, of course. Was there any difficulty in tracking down relatives and having them talk to you in that story?
There was with the relatives. This one was a very different one for me because it was a solved case, and most of mine are unsolved or missing people. And this one had been solved after, almost 40 years.
Right.
So I really wanted to do that one. I wanted to go right through the investigation, and it was the first case that went to trial because of forensic genetic genealogy finding the name of the person, tracking him down. They never would have found the murderer otherwise. So that to me was really fascinating. And I also worked with an amazing cold case detective from down there who just supplied me with a ton of information. So that, for me, made it really interesting because I could go step through the investigation and really take people through what the police did over those years and how they eventually found him. But no, the family in this case did not want to talk. It was still very, very painful. They'd had to sit through the trial. At the time I was writing the book, he was appealing, and it looked like it's a possibility that it could be thrown out and he could be released. So it was an incredibly traumatic time for them. So no, I didn't talk to them, and I completely understood that. But I wanted to do this anyway because I just think it was important to find, that some cases were solved, and this is how, and this is a huge amount of investigation that goes into any case. I think people think police don't do anything, and that's so not true.
No.
So it was good to be able to show that, sort of pull back the curtains as it was. But I did find a friend of Tanya's, and she was a really close friend, and she was able to tell me about Tanya and Jay, because it's really important for me that it's victim focused. And same with my podcast,
Right.
which I did about this one as well. And if anyone can be bothered listening to it, it does interview Jim Shaft, the detective, and it does interview friends and of the Tanya and Jay, and the Saanich police as well. It does a deep dive into how it all came about.
Yeah, just to wrap it up for folks, it was a young couple from Victoria, the Victoria area, Vancouver Island, got a van, and they were going to go to Seattle to pick up some parts for the family furnace repair business, I think it was.
Right, that's right.
And then on the way back, did they ever get to Seattle?
We don't know.
Okay.
They got the ferry, and they were in the Seattle area, but no one knows where they went. The theory of the detectives was that because it was quite late, it would have been after midnight, and they were planning to sleep over anyway, camp over in the van. And he figures that they drove to the place, which was in sort of an industrial area of Seattle, and were going to wait till it opened, and then they'd pick up the parts and drive back the next day. And he thinks that they were picked up then by this guy.
By this guy. So, the guy must have had other means of transportation if he dumped the van farther north in Bellingham and then went back to his own car or whatever by the furnace supply place.
He took a bus.
Yeah.
He obviously, he killed Jay first and then sexually assaulted Tanya and shot her. It was a really horrible murder.
Oh, yeah.
And then it took the van back to Bellingham, and they thought for a while, because they hadn't found them, they were still missing people, that Jay was responsible, so he was kind of suspect number one for a while. And the van was parked close to the Greyhound station, so they'd figure, at that point they were thinking it was Jay, but it was obviously William Talbot, murderer,
Right.
took the bus back to wherever his car was.
It's crazy. The things that happen and we don't know about them. It's just, could be the person next door who goes off on a trip and doesn't come back. You don't know why, what happened. Life is a mystery. Eve Lazarus has been with us. Eve, before we go, can you tell us about your podcast, your website, and your latest book, please? Not necessarily in that order.
My website is just my name, evelazarus.com, and my blog, every place has stories on that. You can also get hold of my podcast through that, Cold Case Canada, or anywhere else that you listen to podcasts, Apple, Spotify, all of those different channels have it. And my new book, came out in April. It's called Beneath Dark Waters, The Legacy of the Empress of Island Shipwreck.
And what's up next for you then?
I'm not sure at this point. I'm promoting the book. Some writers' festivals and things happening, and really, I've got a couple of things I'm playing with, but nothing that's far ahead enough to talk about.
Gotcha. Perfect. Okay, Eve Lazarus, and that's L-A-Z, as we say in Canada, A-R-U-S, Eve Lazarus. And you can look up her website and things like that just from that, evelazarus.com. Eve, thank you very much. It's been a treat, and it's too bad I bumbled my way through this one. But, hey, it's early here. What can I tell you?
Oh, my pleasure. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Great questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for visiting with us today. This is Talking Books and Stuff with Dennis Rimmer. Contact him at dennis@talkingbooks.tk. Thank you, and may all the good news be yours. Oh, and don't forget to check out his book, The Great Canadian Notebook, available across Canada and at amazon.ca.